Hello and welcome to the Meet the Parents podcast.
Hello and welcome to episode 23 of the Meet the Parents podcast, which brings you another 30 or so minutes of chat from some of the UK's top parent bloggers. I'm Tim from Slouching Towards Thatcham, and this evening I'm talking to Hannah from Budding Smiles and Hayley from Downside Up. Good evening, ladies.
Hello.
Hi Tim, hi Hannah.
So this week we're going to talk about parenting qualifications and growing old gracefully, or should that be disgracefully? We're recording tonight hot on the heels of Andrea Leadsam's withdrawal from the Conservative Party leadership contest. The Energy Minister and former Economic Secretary to the Treasury landed herself in hot water with the revelation that she had exaggerated her credentials on her CV about her time at investment fund managers Invesco, which she then followed up with ill-advised comments last week that being a mother enhanced her leadership abilities when compared to her childless rival Theresa May. So, in a slightly roundabout way, let's talk about parenting qualifications. Now, in January this year, David Cameron announced plans to launch parenting classes for parents. The PM said that we all need more help with this, the most important job we'll ever have, and I think we can agree on that. And he promised education in topics such as helping children play and dealing with bad behaviour, all with the aim of keeping families together and happy. Now, actually, this isn't such a new idea. Classes to support would-be parents have been on offer for a number of years. If I'm being honest, I'm not really sure how relevant this might be for many parents. Now, there are about 700,000 babies born in the UK every year. Let's say half of those are to first-time parents, who would be the main audience for these courses. Now, some of these will either not want or feel they don't need a course, and that's very much their own decision, while a large number will get their advice from friends and family, or from blogs or online forums. So what do we think about the principle that first-time parents could benefit from some kind of guidance in parenting? Is it a sound idea? I mean, after all, we already have antenatal classes to help us prepare for birth, so why not extend that principle to advice for those early weeks and months?
I can see that there's probably a need for a more consistent support. I know personally I found that in the early weeks, certainly of Toby's life, I was finding that I'd get mixed advice from the many different midwives that were coming over to see us, and then different tips altogether from the health visitor, and then friends and family are saying different things. So I'm not sure whether we need to add another voice into the equation, or whether there needs to be a bit more consistency in the postnatal care that specifically first-time parents, but all parents really receive. I had quite a tough time with Toby, and I could have done with just one person who I knew was there, you know, to be on the end of the phone that I could ask questions to, that wasn't going to judge me and could just listen and advise and support, really.
I think I sort of found myself nodding along there, Hannah. Yes, I think we have too much information, and much of it conflicting as new parents and when we're pregnant. Yes, too much advice was the problem I found when Mia was born. Too many manuals saying different things, too many professionals and family. So yes, an additional layer. And the worry that I would have with such a course is that it would adhere to a sort of curriculum, which would be very factual and based on statistics and sort of general norms. And as I know only too well, babies don't fit into those sort of moulds, and nor do families and parents. And I love Hannah's idea of one wise, sort of very wise, experienced professional, perhaps almost like the role of a health visitor that could be extended, that you could build up a relationship with, that was there to give advice. Yes, there is a need for more support, but I don't think a course where you sit in a classroom is the answer, to be honest. And I think, Tim, you hit on the right tracks by saying, perhaps it's the online support and the blogs that do provide exactly that kind of support when it's needed.
Yeah, and I think there is definitely something to to there being different solutions, or at least different options that should be made available to people. Because as you say, no two babies are ever alike, and there's not necessarily any one right way to do things. And sometimes what we need is not so much direction, I guess, as options.
And also, I think very often these sort of, from reading any pregnancy manual or baby sort of parenting book, it very often sort of puts down what you should be expecting from your child, what you typically should be seeing, and anything that deviates from that causes worry. And in my experience, that was the case. And certainly if you have a child who has any health complications or any kind of developmental delay, you're thrown into turmoil by that, such a thing.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I think from having had Toby, I mean, we've been very lucky, but he did have a lot of issues initially with silent reflux and dairy intolerances and such, and he was an extremely unsettled baby that would scream for 10 hours a day. It wasn't helpful for me to have health visitors or midwives and doctors telling me that my latch wasn't correct with breastfeeding, or that it was just colic and he'd grow out of it by the time he was 3 months old. That sort of thing wasn't helpful. I needed directing to get the correct support for what we were going through, and actually that did come in the form of other bloggers in the end.
Yeah, that's right. And I guess what you're getting from bloggers is you're getting a whole range of different experience, and you're getting support as well, aren't you, rather than just being told that you should be doing this, or that perhaps it's something very particular that's causing a particular reaction within the baby, whereas actually it could be one of a number of different things. And Hannah, if you look back to these first couple of months now of parenting a new child, was there anything that you wish that you'd been taught or supported with post-birth that would have been useful to you?
There were certainly a few things. I mean, very, very early on in Toby's life, we're talking literally about 2 or 3 days old, I, without wishing to be too graphic, I lost one heck of a blood clot, and I was terrified because all my midwives had said to me, had you lost any clots? And every time I said no, they said, oh, that's good. So then when I lost the mother of all blood clots, I just assumed that must mean bad. And I was terrified. I saw myself being in hospital, leaving my son without a mum when he was only a couple of days old. So I think sometimes there's just a way of explaining things to parents. It could have been, okay, well, if you do lose one, don't worry about it. Give us a call if you're concerned, things like that. And certainly with Toby's silent reflux, I think I could have been supported better with that, because as I said previously, I just kept being told that my latch was wrong when it wasn't. He was breastfeeding absolutely fine, or that it was just colic. And there's no just when it comes to a child that's screaming all the time. It's absolutely dreadful. So I think there could certainly be more support and more recognition that parenting isn't just this wonderful natural process that we all take to like ducks to water.
And often it's very much the opposite that's true, isn't it? And Hayley, looking back to your experiences, I mean, first time round, was there anything that you looked at maybe 2 to 3 months down the line and thought, I wish I'd been told that, or been given a bit more support in this beforehand?
Do you know, I think it's quite interesting to listen to you there, Hannah. I think almost everything about Mia's arrival as our first baby was a shock to me. And paradoxically, Natty being born with a heart condition and Down syndrome was very much easier, other than the shock for us and getting our head around that diagnosis. We were lifted and supported and carried and helped, but with our first child, who was completely healthy and, in inverted commas, typical in every way, we just left in the deep end, and I knew nothing about babies, and breastfeeding was a disaster. I was getting support from neighbours, ringing them in the middle of the night, trying to ask for help or what to do. We were very much left alone. Bob was working abroad. I was totally on my own without family for much of it, and it was very, very hard. We were lucky enough to have a doula at the birth of both our children. She was life-changingly amazing, but I wish she could have just come in every day rather than just being there for the birth. She was wonderful. I guess everyone needs a kind of grandmotherly figure around at that time to just say it's okay.
I know with us, over our first couple of months, looking back on that, I think we were really lucky that we had a lot of mutual support from the friends that we'd made locally through NCT and NHS antenatal classes, and from other friends who already had children. I mean, we were pretty much the last of our group of friends to have kids. So I think if we'd been the first in our group to have children, I think having some kind of additional support, I stress support rather than training or teaching, on what to do post birth would have been really helpful. And I think, particularly post birth, because I think what you get taught in antenatal classes does focus very much on preparing for birth, and there isn't really much in the way of advice for coping with the other stresses that life with a new baby inevitably brings, or what to do when they reach 2 to 3 months old. And and in fairness, if they taught you that pre-birth, it would probably just go in one ear and out the other anyway, wouldn't it? Now, between the three of us, we each have multiple children, so did we find that becoming a parent second time around, or even third time in my case, was easier having had previous experience? I mean, how have you found it, Hannah? Because this is obviously freshest in your memory at the moment.
It is. I mean, Martha's 10 weeks old now. There's no doubt about it. She is a far calmer and more settled baby than Toby was, and I don't think that simply comes down to her being a second baby. That said, I had prepared myself that there was a chance that I could have another baby with silent reflux, another baby that was screaming for 10 hours a day. And so I think with Toby, it all came as such a shock. I was expecting to be extremely sleep deprived. I was expecting that breastfeeding might be a bit difficult and, all these sorts of things. But I wasn't expecting Toby, basically. Whereas this time around, I'd sort of prepared myself for that. And actually, having Martha, where the worst that happens is that she projectile pukes over me a few times a day, and I have to change my outfit. That's fine. I can cope with that. So I think the second time around, you can prepare yourself based on your first experience. Obviously, it doesn't always go the way around that mine has been, and sometimes the second baby can be maybe harder or have health problems or, a stronger personality, shall we say. But I do think it does help you to be prepared. If nothing else, I knew that the first couple of weeks of breastfeeding were really rough, but then it got easier and I could manage it and things like that. The emotional side of it, the fact that around about day 3 I get the baby blues really badly, but that by day 4 I feel the world again. So I do think that I felt more prepared this time around, certainly.
And what about with yourself, Hayley? I mean, obviously very different circumstances with Mia and then with Natty.
Being pregnant for the second time with Natty, I very arrogantly thought, I'll have it nailed this time. And it actually makes me feel quite emotional listening to you there, Hannah, because that was how it was meant to be. What I would say is just expect the unexpected with every pregnancy and wait until you met your baby before you form any sort of ideas about what it's going to be like second time round, because obviously for us the second time round was an enormous challenge. Just taking breastfeeding as an example, I thought I breastfed Mia for 2 years. I thought I knew exactly what I was doing, and of course Natty, when she was born, she was poorly and she was in intensive care, and so every drop of milk that went down her nose, in fact, had to be expressed. And I was expressing, 24 hours around the clock for 3 months. Yes, just different challenges. And I think each child, you've just got to wait and get to know them for the unique individual they are.
I definitely benefited from having had the experience second time round, because with Toby, I delivered him at home myself, which would have been far more traumatic if he'd been our first, whereas actually having been through a home birth once and been involved in that, doing the delivery myself was comparatively okay. And I do remember afterwards in the following weeks when I can remember Heather and I repeatedly having the conversation about how things were much less than twice as hard with 2, and wondering actually how on earth some of the things that we did with Isaac had managed to take up as much time as they did.
Yes, I think we've had those conversations too.
Everything suddenly becomes much quicker and more efficient when you have multiple children. And I don't make light of it. There were definitely things that were harder with a second child and subsequently with 3. But in many respects, I think they were generally speaking, only a bit more difficult rather than a lot more difficult. And certainly having 3 kids is, on the whole, not 3 times as difficult as having one. Although there are certain days when I think it's at least 20 times as difficult. So it depends what day of the week you catch me on. But what about the dads in all this? Do they need some support of some description? So, I mean, Hayley, how have things been for Bob?
Well, it's very interesting. Bob's a pretty hands-on dad, but quite an old-fashioned dad in his attitude. He's quite a bit older than me, and I know certainly when Natty was born, his attitude was just, she'll be fine. She'll be fine. I know he didn't feel that. I know he felt the shock that I felt and was worried too. I don't think he would have ever sought out any support. He would never have looked at a blog online or gone to a group. And I think a lot of dads are perhaps like that. It's fine and we'll carry on. Maybe he's of another generation, but I don't think I think he probably needed support but didn't seek it out.
So Hannah, how about Phil? Has he expressed any need for support?
I think, he's always wanted to be my support. And I agree with what Hayley said, that sometimes I think possibly he hasn't sought support out for himself because he feels like I'm the one that needs it. And I have needed it. And he has absolutely been my rock through the hard times with Toby, especially. I think that he it has impacted on him. There's times when he would get home from work when Toby was young and I would be tearing my hair out. So he'd, been out of the house since 6 o'clock in the morning, done a full day's work. Then he came home and had to deal with a screaming child and quite often a crying wife as well. This time around, Martha is a lot more settled. Toby, thankfully, is reasonably settled, if not completely hyperactive toddler. But we're having slightly different challenges. And so I think where Phil was able to bottle feed Toby using my expressed milk from a very young age, Martha, on the complete flip side of that, is absolutely refusing all attempts to take a bottle and either laughs or screams. So I think he's not been able to have quite the same level of input with the feeding, for example, which I think he's found quite difficult. So I think the support is needed, but in different ways. And I don't know if it's a male thing not to speak about it quite so much, or whether it's simply that the presumption is that it's the mum who needs more support. But I do think that dads need it as well, certainly.
Yeah, and in truth, I think dads do need a degree of support, but they're probably less likely to need support or the same level of support as mums do. And when we do need it, it's probably of a slightly different nature as well, I guess. I mean, looking back to my experiences, particularly first time round, in those first few months after our kids were born, we often got together with the other families from our antenatal classes, and the guides would trade war stories about sleepless nights and doing the occasional night feed, when it was okay to expect to have sex again, wasn't that a great football game last night, the usual sort of dad stuff. And for at least the first 6 to 12 months, we'd get together once a month or so for a dad's curry or something. But a lot of it was more actually, I think, for the that kind of camaraderie than actually needing the support. But equally, fundamentally, we were all working dads whose wives were all staying at home on maternity leave for at least a few months. So, maybe our need for support was less, and maybe it wasn't so obvious. Or alternatively, maybe it was, but some of us were just less willing to talk about it openly. In that way that men so sometimes do so stereotypically do. Maybe it is a bit different if you're a stay-at-home dad, which comes with a whole different range of issues to if you're a working dad. So maybe that's one that we'll have to ask Dave or John about in the future podcast.
Tim, you saying that you went out for a curry, that really struck a note with me, because I think as a mum in the early days, I remember never going out on my own. So I think that in itself would have made a huge difference to me, just to go out and remember that there was a Hayley underneath just the being a new mum.
Yeah, because often as a new mum, you almost, again, I think my wife went through this as well. You almost feel like you can't leave the house because you're breastfeeding, you're doing the majority of care, whatever combination of reasons it is, and it is very easy to lose touch with yourself. And even now, it's taken us a few years to get to the point where Heather feels comfortable, going out for an evening with the girls, or doing book club or just spending a few hours away or an evening away from the kids. And it's only really been those last 2 or 3 years she's become more comfortable herself doing that, because I've always said to her, absolutely, go out, spend the evening away, don't feel guilty about it, because the kids will be fine, I'm here, it's not a problem, go out and enjoy yourself. But often it's very difficult for mothers to make that, to make that departure, isn't it? So that's the Meet the Parents Guide to Parenting and Parenting Qualifications. They might well be of some use to some new parents, but others will be quite happy, I suspect, to declare their studying days over. You've attended the NHS and NCT antenatal classes, but now the baby's born, it's time to take the Alternative Parenting GCSE. Learn vital parenting skills, such as how to win the battle to watch football rather than Frozen on TV, or how to change a nappy with a glass of wine in one hand, or how not to kill your other half when they stroll in the door declaring how hard a day they've had at the office, when you've spent your entire day chasing the little buggers all over the house. The GCSE in Alternative Parenting is operated by the following examination boards: LOL, OMG and FFS. Day by day, we're all inexorably getting older, and some of us are, sadly, further along that journey than others. Now, without pointing fingers or stating numbers, Hayley and I have both celebrated our 21st birthdays more times than we care to remember. So let's start by talking about age milestones. So 21, 30, 40, and so on. Do they become more or less significant or more or less worrying as we get older? I mean, speaking for myself, I can remember having a huge wobble as my 30th birthday approached. And yet when I reached my 40th, that caused barely a ripple. Now, Hayley, I'm not going to ask you to discuss specific numbers or milestones, but have they affected you differently as they've passed?
I've always had a problem with milestones. I've always 21. I wasn't that keen on. 30. I hated. 40. I ignored. I did celebrate 41, but I have to say, and I don't mind saying that I'm 46, but I think I've suddenly reached a kind of. But it's a cross between being amused by my age and being at peace with it. But I think I have certainly realised of late that I have entered the zone of lady of a certain age, and I never knew what that meant. But I think it means where you spend more money on solid undergarments than you do on a pair of jeans, and you find yourself falling over in town, and it's an older lady who comes over to help you up while the teens laugh. Those are the kind of experiences that I've had recently.
Are we in the zone of the Bridget Jones big girl pants then?
I think we're sort of heading that. It's more, it's about structure, and I think we're heading that way. I'm sorry, I'm choking now, but I'm okay with that. I was listening to a very interesting programme on Radio 4 the other day about exactly this topic, and the woman talking said, the midlife crisis crunch comes when you realise that you've got less life left to live than you have lived. And I think that's probably the point that I'm reaching, it is a slightly worrying point, but I think it also does make you realise that you've actually got to make the most of it. So I think I'm being quite upbeat about it so far, but I did hate being 40. So maybe I'm over the hump, as it were.
Hannah, how about you? I should point out at this stage you've reached far fewer of these milestones than either Hayley or I. But have any of these milestones been much of an issue for you, or have they been more of a cause for celebration? And how do you feel about the next round number that's over the horizon?
Well, I'm 30 in September, so that that's sort of a cause for celebration for me. I think if I wasn't married in a very happy marriage and I've got Toby and Martha, then possibly I'd be dreading it slightly more. I think for some reason 30 was always the one I had in my head. It was almost like a make or break point in my life as to whether I'd finally be settled and happy. My 18th, 21st, they sort of passed by without too much fuss, really. I was fairly ambivalent, I think. On my 18th, I always say that my parents threw me out of a plane because they paid for me to do a tandem skydive. So that was the highlight of that. I think I did go out with a few friends, but there was nothing crazy about it. 21st, I can't even remember what I did. It was that unremarkable. So I think 30 was always the one I had in my head. Would I be married? Would I be happy? Would I have children? Or would I be on my own still? I've lived on my own with my cat since I was 2021, so that's what I was doing on my 21st. So I think now that my 30th is only 2 months away, because I'm so settled and so happy in life, I'm feeling really good about it. And as for the ones that come up after that, well, I'll take each one as it comes.
If we all look back, how have we changed with age? Obviously there were some obvious changes like having kids and so on, but kind of deep down inside ourselves, how do we feel we've changed versus, I don't know, 5, 10 or 15 years ago?
Oh God, enormously. And I think I don't think I can put having children to one side. I think it's inextricably linked, and certainly having a child with additional needs has made me a far better person, far more patient, understanding my priorities are straight. 15 years ago, all I cared about was the next holiday, the lie-in, the latest film. Superficial nonsense. I think I'm a far better person than I ever was. And they do say youth is wasted on the young, don't they? But I think I wasted mine.
How about you, Hannah?
I have been travelling basically since I was 16 years old. So that was always the biggest part of my life, really, up until I met Phil. And then we've done some travelling together, which was absolutely wonderful. But I think the biggest change in me has come since meeting Phil. He was the first first relationship that I had who he just gave me so much balance, and with that balance came a lot more confidence. I was able to shed the long held belief that I wasn't really worth very much. I used to be terribly lacking in confidence, and that was always a huge problem for me. I was bullied all the way through primary and secondary school, just didn't have any faith in myself and what I was capable of. But meeting Phil and seeing that here was this person that I completely adored, and for some reason he adored me back, and I think that was a real changing point for me. So we've been together 5 years next month, and I think that has been the biggest period of change in my life, and thankfully very positive change, because I'm a much more confident person. I actually believe in myself. I have my wobbles and he picks me back up again, but certainly, children aside, and I agree with Hayley, you can't completely detach from how becoming a parent does change you. But really the biggest thing for me was in meeting Phil and starting to believe that I had some value to give to the world, and I think that's been incredibly empowering for me over the last 5 years.
I think with me, I guess there's two things. I think the first thing is the passage of time as you get older. I know it's a bit of a cliche to say so, but time really does fly as you get older. And a number of conversations Heather and I have now where we'll be saying something like, well, I wrote a post last weekend about the Pulp song Disco 2000, which was released in 1995 at the height of the Battle of Britpop with, Blur and Oasis and so on. And we were just kind of talking about it. And it was like, at one point I just turned around to her and said, you do know that was 21 years ago. One of the other things that's obviously changed is that I'm no longer the fine physical specimen I was in my 20s. But back in the days when I could run like Usain Bolt and cycle like Chris Hoy, only faster. Nowadays, I look forward to a quick nap on the sofa while the kids are watching CBeebies or CBBC, and I now consider walking to the wine rack to fetch a nice Pinot Noir to count as exercise. In all honesty, I think and I think I've spoken about this previously, the thing that's changed most about me in the last maybe 8, 10, 12 years or so is that I've finally become comfortable in my own skin. I worry much less now about what people think of me or what I want them to think of me, and I'm much more concerned with what I think of me. I worry less about me. Instead, I worry more about the kids, and I guess that's a natural part of growing up and being a parent, isn't it? What about our blogs? Now, none of those ever stand still for very long. Our focus changes, and of course, as our children grow up, that inevitably causes a blog to change over time anyway. So, how different is your blog to when you started out?
When I started, it was basically just a diary. I'd never really read blogs before, and it was simply, I'm pregnant and I want to remember this and I have a terrible memory, so let's blog about it. I think now I'm using it much more as a voice and as a platform. I mostly write about, aren't my kids cute and this is what we've been up to, but at the same time, when there have been things going on in the world that I've felt powerfully about and strongly about, I have then written about it. And so for me, it's evolved into somewhere where I feel safe to have my own voice. I felt safe to talk about the issues that we've had with Toby and not felt judged by it, because I know that a lot of people reading it have been going through the same thing. And in fact, I get a lot of messages from parents of silent reflux babies and high knees babies that are asking for support from me, which is lovely. So I think it's evolved really from a diary to a bit more of a platform, and certainly somewhere that I feel safe to have my own voice, and I don't feel like I have to put on any kind of act. It's just me, and I'm really happy about that.
And Hayley, you've recently branched out in a very new direction with your adventures on Facebook Live, haven't you?
Oh, goodness. Yeah. I think for me, blogging is a very organic process. My blog's coming up for 5 years now, and it started as a place to just put all the information that I'd spent hours and hours searching for about Down syndrome and sort of therapies and so on for babies in one place. But it very quickly evolved, and I've always said that I've let it lead me where it needs to go. And it's taken me on an incredible journey of campaigning and, media and all kinds of, ups and downs. And it's brought me to my knees, and it's made me ill. And then I've stepped back from it, and I've gone with it again. Yes, Facebook Live is just a new fun little element that's a little tag on. I think in one way our blogs are moving away from the blog themselves and more into perhaps Instagram and Facebook Live. It's just a fun way of reaching out to other families at bedtime, and we do it at 7:00 every evening, and Natty just has a little chat. And we've only been doing it a few days now, but it's amazing how many families with little ones with Down syndrome are tuning in regularly, and their little ones are watching Natty and sort of learning from her, which is lovely. But it's a new departure for me. But I don't really see it as blogging. I guess it's just the blog is the spoke in the middle, isn't it? It's sort of the hub in the middle with the spokes coming out, and all the other business goes on around it. But yes, as Hannah said, my blog has changed a lot as the girls are getting older. I don't write about poo explosions anymore. I respect the girls' privacy. Mia has now categorically said she doesn't really want to be included at all. So I don't write about her, not because she's not important, but because she doesn't want to be on the blog. And I think as time passes, the blog becomes a little bit more generic and less about our family in order to respect their privacy.
Yeah. So we can expect Natty to be announced as Chris Evans' replacement to host Top Gear in the near future. I guess it's been about 3 years since I moved from having a general blog to a family-focused one. But even in those 3 years, when I look back, I've evolved constantly. I've definitely got a much more distinct voice and writing style than I did back then. Plus, increasingly, I find that I'm writing a bit less about the kids and a bit more about wider family issues and me, from writing about the impact of the EU referendum on the family to more nostalgic pieces. And of course, I've branched out into podcasts and very, very bad singing. So that's how Hannah, Hayley and I are dealing with the march of time. Not so much men behaving badly as parents aging badly. Before we go, what else have we been up to recently?
I feel like I'm living in London more than I am at home at the moment. Seem to be there at least once a week lately, and I'm back for some reason. I am braving the journey on the train with 2 children and no other adult support to go down to London this Friday. Friday just gone, Toby turned 2. So that was a really wonderful celebration. We went to West Midlands Safari Park, and he was thrilled at feeding giraffes and seeing the land of dinosaurs that they've got there. So most of the last couple of weeks has really been about travelling between home and London and Toby's birthday, which was wonderful.
And a belated happy birthday to Toby.
Thank you.
And how about you, Hayley? I know you never stop running.
I don't ever stop running, but I'm really excited this week because Natty and I have been invited to Fox's Academy end of year award ceremony and ball. And I don't know if you ever caught the documentary about Fox's Academy, but it's a hotel in Minehead, which is completely staffed by young adults who have a learning disability. And we're beyond excited to be going to the ball. So Natty has polished off her tiara, and we have her silver shoes at the ready, and we're going off up there on Friday.
Ah, splendid. From my perspective, it's been a crazy busy couple of weeks since the Brit Mums BML conference, so I've agreed to take the entire family to Camp Festival on behalf of a brand sponsor. Now, that's quite a big thing for me, because normally I am to camping what Superman is to kryptonite. It's also nearly the end of the school year, so we've been busy racing around doing sports days and concerts and lots of other end of term stuff between us. The boys had their end of year reports, which were good enough to merit them receiving new watches as a reward. And I made my radio debut on BBC Radio Berkshire, talking about being one of the rare breed of dad bloggers. And so that's it for another episode of the Meet the Parents podcast. We'll be back next week, but in the meantime, here's where you can find the 3 of us online.
I'm at Budding Smiles on Twitter, and my blog is buddingsmiles.co.uk.
And I'm at Downside Up on Twitter, and the blog is downsideup.com.
And I'm at Thatcham Dad, and my blog is slouchingtowardsthatcham.com. So you can download this podcast on iTunes and Android devices, on our website at meettheparentspodcast.com, and via a variety of podcasting apps. Do please give us a follow on Twitter at Parents Podcast and Facebook at facebook.com/meettheparentspodcast. So thank you very much for listening, and do please join us again next week. Good night.